The coat smelled like mothballs, not the vintage kind, the forgotten kind. It came in a wrinkled gift bag, no tag, no ribbon, just a folded piece of masking tape that said, "To Nora from all of us." It was Christmas Eve at my sister Caroline's penthouse. Marble floors, crystal trees, champagne in hand-blown glasses. Everyone dressed like the cover of a luxury catalog. Except me, in my worn gray sweater and boots I'd kept for 10 winters. I accepted the bag with a soft thank you. Everyone was watching, especially Caroline. She tilted her wine glass, smirked. "We know you've had a rough year, Nora." Then added for everyone to hear, "We all chipped in. Thought you could use something warm." Laughter bubbled around the table. Even my mother smiled, that tight, painful smile she used when pretending I wasn't a disappointment. I glanced at my brother Miles. He gave me a thumbs up, then returned to talking loudly about his third rental property. They didn't know, they never do. They didn't know that the coat I wore outside was stitched in Italy, designed under a private label I owned. They didn't know that Nora's rough year included closing on a 12-story office tower. That the small job at a local finance firm they liked to joke about was a smokescreen for the private equity fund I built from nothing. Or that the loan Caroline had just secured to expand her interior design firm had been signed off by my office, under a holding company name they never cared to learn. I folded the coat gently, not because I liked it, but because I knew one day I'd frame it. And that day was coming soon. In fact, the invitation for their loan renewal meeting at Westridge Capital was already waiting in their inbox. They just hadn't noticed the sender. Whitaker, chairwoman, I smiled politely across the table, held up the coat like it was sacred. "It's perfect," I said, truly thoughtful. They beamed, mistaking pity for poverty, like they always had. The brunch began exactly at 11:30, it always did. Caroline didn't believe in ish. She called it curated timing. A pianist played soft jazz in the corner. The dining table, 12 feet long, gleamed under a chandelier made of hand-blown Czech crystal. Place cards in gold foil. Pomegranate mimosas with edible flowers. Monogrammed napkins folded into origami swans. I was seated at the end of the table, next to the radiator. A strategic placement, far enough from the core to be included, but not enough to be seen. My chair wobbled slightly, no one else's did. "Lovely of you to join, Nora," Caroline said with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. Her pearls shimmered against her velvet blouse and her tone. "We almost forgot you RSVP'd." Across from me, Miles was already on his second mimosa, boasting about his upcoming NFT comeback, as if 2021 had never ended. "Timing s everything," he said, "and nobody's doing it right. Except me, of course." Caroline nodded sagely. "He has such vision." I glanced around. My cousin Isabel had just come back from Milan and was now explaining, at length, how hard it was to find proper saffron. My mother was adjusting her brooch, the one she always wore when she needed to feel superior. And my Uncle Richard was complimenting himself on surviving the recession by investing in his gut. It was familiar. Then came the part I knew was coming. The inevitable moment when the attention, temporarily exhausted elsewhere, would fall on me. "So, Nora." Caroline's voice dropped half a register, still at that little admin job. I nodded once. "Still there." "Oh, bless your heart," she said, not bothering to hide the pity. "You've always been the steady one, not flashy but dependable." Miles chuckled. "God, remember when Nora tried to do that startup thing? What was it again? Community banking for immigrants." He made air quotes. Very noble, very nonprofit vibes. I smiled, something like that. They laughed. Audrey, the youngest cousin, tilted her head. "I thought you said you worked in finance now." A dangerous question, but Caroline cut in before I could answer. "Sweetheart, Nora helps with spreadsheets. She's not like in finance." She turned back to the table. "Not like Marcus or I, obviously. We deal with capital, real numbers." My mother sighed, a polished performance. "She's always been a gentle soul, never cared about ambition, but she means well." They meant it as praise. And that's what made it worse. In front of me sat a plate of truffle eggs Benedict, but I was chewing on something else. Memories. I remembered the year I got into Columbia, and they all assumed I'd forged the acceptance. The time I got a promotion at 28, and Caroline had said, probably a diversity hire. Or when I wore a Cartier watch to family wedding, and Miles whispered, it's either fake or borrowed. They had always preferred a version of me that felt harmless, ordinary, manageable, so I let them have it. For years. Nora, Miles said suddenly, you still renting that tiny apartment above the bakery? Yes, I replied. No need to mention that I own the building, or the entire block. Cute little place, Caroline added. Cozy, I always said success isn't about size. Then you must feel very successful, I said, sipping my water. There was a pause. Then laughter. They thought I was joking. I was. Oh, speaking of success, Caroline lit up, we're meeting with Westridge Capital this week. They're restructuring the lease on my studio building. Very VIP firm. We're moving up. Miles nodded. I've got a line in with their funding team for a vacation property flip. Finally found a lender that doesn't grill you over petty things like debt ratios. I stirred my tea. It was Earl Grey. Imported from a company I acquired last fall. They didn't know because they never asked. Just then, Caroline's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, frowned slightly. Our meeting with Westridge got rescheduled. They said the chairwoman will be handling it personally now. Her brows lifted, impressed. I guess we're important enough to get the top seat? Finally. Miles raised his glass, to moving up. Everyone clinked, except me. I raised my cup, but didn't drink, because they had no idea that the chairwoman was already sitting at their table, behind the centerpiece, next to the radiator. Wednesday, 9:00 a.m. The Petersons arrived at Westridge Capital like they were walking onto a red carpet. Caroline wore a snow-white blazer with gold buttons and heels too sharp for her level of humility. Miles had swapped his usual bomber for a tailored navy suit, the one he saved for serious deals. My mother, she was in pearls as always, like armor. They were greeted by a receptionist with a calm voice and a sharper memory. Good morning, please follow me to the executive conference wing. Caroline blinked. Oh, we usually just meet in the 4th floor client room. Yes, ma'am, the assistant smiled, but the chairwoman requested a more private space this time. They exchanged glances. Miles grinned. Told you, VIP. The assistant led them down a quiet corridor, floors thick with carpet, walls paneled in warm oak, muted lighting. Everything designed to whisper money, not shout it. They were ushered into a high-ceilinged boardroom, glass on one side revealing the skyline. Leather chairs already pulled out ready, water poured, coffee brewed. A single notepad lay in the center of the table. On it, N. Whitaker, chairwoman. Embossed in gold, they didn't know I was already there. Watching from the adjoining office. Behind the one-way glass, I could hear them clearly. Caroline tapped the pen. Well, this is different. I like it. Very discreet. Very powerful. Miles was pacing, already crafting his opening pitch. We position ourselves as low-risk but high-flexibility clients. The numbers speak for themselves. He didn't know I'd already read his numbers. Twice, my mother sat calmly, legs crossed, hands folded in practiced patience. She smiled at the receptionist and said, "Please tell the chairwoman we're ready." The assistant nodded once, then turned, walked down the hall, and knocked gently on my door. I didn't move right away. Let the silence steep. Let them marinate in expectation. Then I stood, straightened the collar of my charcoal gray suit, stepped into black leather heels, brushed a strand of hair behind my ear, and opened the door. The room turned slowly. Like a scene paused mid-laugh, Miles froze mid-step. Caroline's pen dropped onto the marble table. My mother's hands gripped each other until the knuckles turned white. I took 2 calm steps in, smiled. Good morning. A silence. Then Caroline blinked. Nora. I nodded, took my seat at the head of the table. Caroline tried to laugh. Oh, are you shadowing for someone? I looked directly at her. No, I'm the one you're meeting. Miles scoffed. This is a joke, right? I reached into my folder, slid across a set of documents signed, stamped. Chairwoman Nora Whitaker. owner of Westridge Capital Holdings, majority shareholder of Peterson Portfolio Line. Miles's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. Caroline stared, her face flickered between confusion and calculation. "This isn't possible," she whispered. You manage files, you were always." "Invisible," I finished for her, comfortably unimpressive. "Easy to ignore." I leaned back calm. Turns out that's a very effective place to build an empire from. My mother finally spoke, her voice cracked slightly. "You've been running this." "For a while now," I said. She stared down at the table. Her wedding ring caught the light. But her certainty did not. Caroline leaned forward. "But why didn't you say anything?" I smiled softly. "You never asked." They didn't know what to do with the silence, so I gave them more. Then I tapped the file in front of me. "Let's begin." Caroline opened hers. Inside, financials, projections, credit reports, missed payments, all in her name. Miles flipped his. Fraud flags, investment irregularities. A recommendation for regulatory review, signed off by me. My mother's file was thinner. A single page. Her overdraft agreement with Westridge. And the signed clause, voiding preferential access to funds based on familial association. I looked at each of them, not with malice, not even with pride, just truth. "You came here asking for another loan, another favor, another chance to expand a life built on borrowed credibility." I paused, "But I came here to make sure you understood something. That the person you underestimated for decades is now the only reason any of your cards are still standing." No one spoke. For the first time, truly no one had anything left to say, so I stood, gathered the files, and walked to the door. "Your proposals will be reviewed by our compliance team. No special terms, no family privileges, just performance." I looked back once more, and "Don't worry," I added. "I still have the coat." Then I left. Let the silence follow me like perfume, because the best revenge doesn't raise its voice, it raises the bar. 48 hours after the bank meeting, I got 3 unexpected visits. No emails, no scheduled calls, just like old times when they used to show up in my life without warning. Usually to remind me I was the leftover sibling. Victoria, the PR queen's sister. Caroline arrived first. 7:45 a.m., no lipstick, no assistant, just a designer tote bag and an over-rehearsed smile. "It's about the lease," she said, taking the seat across from me in the glass conference room. "Our expansion hit a few snags, but the design firm's still solid. We've got high-profile clients." I opened my tablet, didn't look at her. "You're 3 months behind on payments. 0 projected cash flow for Q2, and you just bought a Bentley last week." She froze. I still hadn't looked up. Curious budgeting. "Nora, I didn't even know it was you." I raised my eyes slowly. "Exactly." She flinched. I tapped my fingers lightly on the table. "Starting next month, your office is moving downstairs, next to inventory, smaller lease. Matches your books. No drama, just math." Miles, the smooth-talking cousin. Miles didn't come to the office. He invited me to lunch at some overpriced Italian place. No Rolex this time, no crocodile loafers. Just a wrinkled suit and darting eyes. "Nora." He actually used my real name for once. "I think we can collaborate. My firm could help manage your aviation assets. Diversify globally, more flexibility." I sipped my wine. "Miles," I said evenly, "I've read your audits. Your version of flexibility includes laundering fees through 3 shell companies in the Caymans." He tried to laugh it off, just accounting anomalies. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a headline. "SEC investigates boutique investment firm over fraudulent accounts." His firm's logo, front and center. I tilted the screen toward him, his fork hit the table. Appetite gone. Charlotte, the social media baby sister. Charlotte didn't call ahead. She showed up at our building at 6 p.m., no Range Rover, no Chanel, just an old Toyota and swollen eyes. "The lenders, they want actual income now," she whispered. "We can't fake client profiles anymore. It's getting hard." I tilted my head. "You built a business on smoke and mirrors. You want me to prop that up?" She said nothing, then slowly reached into her purse and took out a tiny folded slip of paper. The bus ticket, the one I got as a joke from her at Christmas. I kept it, she murmured. Didn't think you would. I took it, no reaction. Just slid open my drawer and placed it in a glass case beside a handwritten quote. Sometimes, the insult becomes the inscription. Then I spoke. There's an entry-level spot opening in fleet logistics. Real work, no privileges. Think you can handle that? She nodded, no more words. Mom, the one who came without an agenda. My mother didn't book a time, didn't call ahead. She just appeared one afternoon in the garage, the one I sometimes turned into a tea nook. No diamonds, no stiff perfume, just a faded gray coat I used to wear in high school. What are you planning to do now? She asked softly. I poured the tea, let a few moments pass. Are you asking as my mother? Or as the family's reputation manager? She looked at me, quiet, real. As your mother, nothing else. I nodded, and for the first time I let her in. The final table, no wine, just truth. 3 days later, I hosted a quiet lunch, private dining room, no press, no decor, no titles. Each person got an envelope. Inside, their actual net worth, their debt-to-income ratios, their real position in the empire they thought they built. Caroline's hands shook. This can't be right. 3 consecutive years of losses, I said gently. Last loan underwritten by me, the sister you thought only knew Excel. Miles didn't even open his. He asked one question. We're still family, right? I looked at him. We always were. I just wasn't included in the group photo. I placed a folder on the table. 3 options for each of them. 1, start over. Entry level, earn real equity through work. 2, liquidate personal assets to repay the debt. 3, declare personal bankruptcy and be permanently removed from my financial system. Silence, but not the kind that used to follow their judgment. This time it was the silence of facing truth. The kind that doesn't echo, it lands. 1 month later, a different kind of peace. The building was quieter now. No rushed heels on marble. No fake laughter echoing down glass halls. Just soft footsteps, real ones. Caroline had taken the logistics role. She shows up early, doesn't wear heels anymore, doesn't make small talk she doesn't mean. Miles, he disappeared for a while, then sent a postcard from a small town in Montana. Said he was learning how to be nobody for a bit. Charlotte started a side business, real product, real effort. No filters, no hashtags. Just handmade ceramic candles with one quiet promise. No more pretending. The garage, a new ritual. Every Sunday, I sit in the garage. It's still my favorite space, part storage, part sanctuary, tea brewing quietly, books stacked along the wall, a small heater humming under the table. There's a folded coat on the chair beside me, gray wool, stiff at the collar. It used to be mine, high school, winter walks, and the only thing I owned that felt like armor. Mom brought it with her that day, said it still smelled like December. She visits now. No speeches, no agendas. Sometimes she just knits. Sometimes she just sits. We don't talk much about the past. But the silence no longer feels like erasure. It feels like repair. The bus ticket in a new frame. The joke ticket Charlotte gave me, it's no longer in a drawer. It's framed now, right next to my first aviation license. And a sticky note I once wrote to myself when I was 22. You don't have to explain to people who never asked. A letter I never sent, and no longer need to. There was a time I wrote a letter, late at night, years ago, after a particularly cruel dinner. It began, to the family that never saw me. But I never finished it. I don't need to now, because they saw, and not because I screamed, not because I demanded, but because I simply stopped hiding. The final visit, Dad. He came unannounced. As always, wore a coat too expensive for the weather, shoes that didn't belong in dust. He walked slowly through the building, paused in front of a mural he didn't know I painted, looked at the words stenciled on the bottom corner. We rise quietly. That's why they never hear us coming. Then he sat across from me in the garage, didn't comment on the chipped mug, didn't correct my choice of furniture, just sat. And then, in the softest voice I'd ever heard from him, he said, I was wrong. I didn't know how to love a daughter who didn't fit the picture. I didn't speak, not because I was cold, but because some moments only need air, not answers. He reached into his pocket, pulled out an old photo. One I thought was lost. Me, age 11, building a cardboard plane in the backyard, duct tape everywhere, dirt on my knees. He placed it on the table. And for the first time, he said, "You always knew how to fly." Then he left, quietly. No farewell, no handshake. Just the slow sound of shoes walking away, not from me but from the past. Epilogue when you stop asking to be seen. People ask me now how I turned it around. I never really answer. Because this was never about revenge, not about proving anyone wrong. It was about one quiet question. What would happen if I stopped shrinking to make others comfortable? The answer, I grew. Into someone who didn't need validation to feel valuable. Into someone who brewed her own tea at her own table, wearing her own name with no apology. Final scene, a new invitation. Last Sunday, Chloe stopped by. Now 17, college brochures in hand, eyes sharp, voice steadier. She handed me a drawing, pencil sketch. Simple lines, a young girl in boots and a scarf. "She's flying a paper airplane," Chloe said, "but it's big now, real." I looked at her. "She's you," Chloe whispered, and in that moment I realized this wasn't about vindication, it was about legacy. To anyone who's ever been the quiet one at the table, the forgotten sibling, the invisible daughter, know this: you are not defined by the volume of their applause. You are not diminished by what they failed to notice. You are allowed to rise. Even if no one claps, even if no one watches, rise anyway, quietly, powerfully, unapologetically.